One, I think body composition is wildly understated in the conversation. Like it is,
I
and
agree.
not always the case, but body composition is usually, it can be. I'm going to try and like layer context over this is to not do absolutes. It can be a predictor of your neuroendocrine state. Let's call it that, right?
Okay.
So you're going to have a certain proclivity to produce a certain amount of hormones that likely have led you to a more favorable body composition or are as a byproduct of a more favorable body composition. So you are what 99% of the world would consider, if not 100, a favorable body composition. You are lean and you hold a lot of muscle. That to me tells me something. Like the number one predictor, if it's not number one, it's in the top five of someone's likelihood of being like pre-hypertensive, diabetic is going to be the amount of muscle mass, right? Now there's a steep curve where that falls off, and you're injecting endogenous insulin, and you're 2% body fat, and you fucked your pancreas to all hell. But there's a meaty part of the bell curve of people who aren't on performance enhancing drugs that if they could get, let's say men under 15% or females under 20 as a back of the napkin range, then you're probably in a position where those carbohydrates prior to training are going to make a meaningful impact on your performance. If you are outside of that and your body composition is not favorable, I think just like we talked about salt earlier, and some supplement companies just going, we're going to ride this wave of, one of them has a gram of salt prior to training. It's like, okay, hold on. The general population, one, does not sweat enough or for long enough to have that fucking matter. Like when you've actually done sweat research on people, humans, athletes, and you start to see how sweat trends, there's an initial spike at the onset of sweating where sodium is a little bit higher, and then it kind of drops off. And then the prolonged periods of body temperature or of elevated body temperature start to see salt ratios creep up from 3 to 1, 4 or 5, 6, and even as high as 7 to 1. But we're talking like 90 minutes to 2 hour practices at the professional level, sometimes outdoors. But we're dealing with levels of physical exertion that most people can't touch, right? Where they just don't have a big enough engine, they don't have a big enough gas tank. So when I think about salt and I think about carbohydrates, I think about, and this runs right in line with a major point around the nutritional strategy that we can fall under pre-workout, which is hydration. Those two things are going to drive hydration, right? If you look at carbohydrates, if you look at salt, if you understand this concept of electrolyte balance and what water is going to do to help balance the amount of electrolytes per volume of fluid, the volume of fluid now becomes the variable. If you eat a bunch of salty food, you wake up in the middle of the night and you have to take a piss, but you're also really thirsty, right? Don't try and sell me on divine creation while I'm thirsty and also have to take a piss at 3 a.m. Like, come on, a divine creator could have figured that out a little bit better. But it's like, salt intake is going to drive fluid retention. And then also carbohydrate intake is going to drive fluid retention. Most people, if you fall within those very, very loose back of the napkin ranges, sub 15, sub 20, male, female, you probably are in excess of both. Not always, but the dietary habits that lead people to that, plus what happens to your neuroendocrine state as a byproduct of being that, is likely going to make it so that your pre-workout carbohydrate needs and the performance that you think you're going to get from it likely. And look, there are professional strength athletes and professional athletes, we worked with plenty of them, that are men over 20% body fat that absolutely need carbohydrates, but they're falling into this category of people who are going out onto a field of play or going to exercise for 90 plus minutes. The sustainability of your performance is when we start to look at some of the research around nutrition and performance. How do we test that? We test it around usually endurance or the ability to perform repetitions. But what is always a proxy to that? Failure. every research study, for the most part, that people talk about when it comes to nutrition and in performance is like you can do the same amount of weight, but for more reps. But okay, we're not picking an arbitrary amount of reps off the shelf, are we? No, we're telling them to perform to failure. But if you're at a young training age, you can't train to failure, right? So this idea of like if you have a client who has shit form on their sixth rep of a leg press, and they have this huge valgus adductor squirmy fucking moment. It's like, what are we feeding this person for? Like, what are we feeding this person so that they're performing? They're not getting, what they would get out learning how to fucking exercise. And it's a variable around nutrition that a lot of people miss, because you have to understand, and this is where the coalescence of an understanding of biomechanics, as sort of you and I have spent most of our times, at least on the outward face, discussing, and nutrition have to go hand in hand. And this is where I see nutritionists fuck up a lot, is you don't know how to interpret the outputs, so your inputs are fucked, right? You and I can look at someone and be like, what the fuck do we need to feed this person for, right? Why do we need to feed this person X number? Why do we need to feed this person like a 260-pound bodybuilder when their training execution is dog shit, that they can't get to a failure worth any sort of pushing, right? It's all technical, it's all skill based. And that's where I think a lot of coaches go wrong in their nutritional, trying to avoid the word strategy here again, but their nutritional approach either to their own training or the training of their clients. It's like you need to understand the output piece and the input piece and how they work together. So I often see, and I guess the point of clarity I'm trying to make here is you not only listen to what you're saying, but look at who's saying it. You're talking to a guy who's been training for 20 years, who's about as dense as a fucking piece of stone physically. You're very intellectually endowed. But it's like,
appreciate that.
I got you, Doug. I got you.
That's
We're
generous,
in this together.
but I appreciate it.
We're in this together, you and I. Yeah, this is. If I talk shit about you, it's coming right back to me. So I'm just really trying to glad hand myself here. But you have to consider something as basic as that, right? Like, what does this body composition need? Right? Yeah. What does this training execution need? What does this lifestyle need? We are in the business of solving problems. Nutrition and supplementation should be looked at as solutions.
Yeah, I think that's a really good lens to look at this through, because I'm speaking about this personally for me, from my body composition and my goals. And what I can say currently about my nutrition is I'm in one hell of a surplus. And what that's done to my pre-workout nutrition is I think it diminishes the importance of that, because I have so much energy available to me at all times, is that it doesn't really matter. It becomes less important what that pre-workout window is, what that meal is, how many calories I've had that day, because I'm in 12 weeks of a surplus where I've had enough energy available at all times for all of my energy expenditure needs and then some. So I think that's a good point to make, is that body composition, yes, but also what does the overall diet look like? Because the more calories in, the less it's going to matter, because you're not having enough calories out to offset that to a point where the specifics are going to make that big of a difference in that small of a time span. But also there is body composition that is kind of the big asterisk by all of this, is that someone that is a higher percent muscle mass and lower percent body fat, it's likely that they're going to have a greater insulin sensitivity, right? So they're going to be able to take carbohydrates in, and they're going to be able to utilize those very quickly. They're going to be sensitive to that, and they're going to turn that into glucose and ATP, and that's going to be more readily available energy for that short window of pre-workout meal to workout. Versus someone that is higher body fat, they're probably going to have less sensitivity to carbohydrates. So if we kind of superimpose that with what their goals likely are with working out, which is probably to lose body fat, then carbohydrates become much less necessary in that pre-workout meal, because realistically what we want to do is we want to use energy that's already available, that's stored within the body as body fat, versus giving them the energy to just pull from their bloodstream in terms of carbohydrates and glucose in that shorter period. So not only are they less equipped to be able to use those carbohydrates in such a short time span, there's less necessity to do so. So that, again, superimposed with training age, like you said, is they're probably not going to be able to train at an intensity if the goal is to lose body fat, not true 100% of the time, because I know we're speaking to on this podcast a lot of like, we'll call them physique athletes or people that compete in body composition modification. Um, I don't know. Yeah, trying to be politically correct here, but which is very rare. But if we look at someone like that, then yeah, they're probably going to have the ability to train to failure. But someone like that, they're probably also going to have an advanced nutritional strategy that comes with that, right? They're probably like doing fasted cardio in the morning, or these things are a little bit more dialed in. But if we look at that, like someone like that, they're probably going to be, if they're in the fat loss phase, they're definitely going to be in some sort of a caloric deficit, right? So that overall nutritional strategy of having less energy available is inherently going to make that pre-workout meal more important, right? If we have lower energy availability, then and we have high insulin sensitivity, then those pre-workout carbs become more important because they need that energy to be able to perform to a point where they can now have an output that's greater than their input.